So many of my readers have asked me to explain what is meant by being muscle-bound that I'll feel compelled to write an article on the subject. In the first place, I would frankly say that I don't know what muscle binding is. Furthermore, I have asked hundreds of athletes and connoisseurs what the expression meant, but I have never found any two that agreed in their definition of the term. Moreover, most of those I asked floundered around, made several guesses, and ended up by admitting that they had heard the phrase muscle-bound, used it themselves, but really did not know, after all, just what it meant. Some of the opinions offered have been ridiculous in the extreme. For example, in the spring of 1914, a salesman called at my office, and after transacting his business, spent a few moments in inspecting my gallery of photographs. Halting in front of a beautiful picture of Sandow, he shook his head, drew a long face, and sadly remarked that Sandow had undoubtedly been a wonderful specimen of manhood. I said, "What do you mean, had been?" "Why," he said, "haven't you heard? He died in agony, muscle-bound." "When did that happen?" I asked. "Oh, several years ago," he replied. I asked him to explain what he meant by his expression. Died in agony, muscle-bound, and finally I got out of him the following weird mixture of ideas. He had heard that rawhide, when drying in the sun, contracted, and somehow he imagined that muscle acted in the same way, and that a man with large muscles was in danger of having those muscles contract, and, as he expressed it, squeeze the lights out of him. In order to show him how far wrong he was, I produced an English magazine containing a picture of Sandow and his 20-year-old daughter, who were then doing an act at a music hall in London. The salesman glanced at the date of the paper and, seeing that it was only 2 weeks past, exclaimed, "Why, then he isn't dead at all." I was able to assure my visitor that Sandow was still alive, still a marvelously strong and beautiful athlete, though in his late 40s, and that he had been accepted for large amounts by the leading life insurance companies. So there you are. This chap admitted that he had told his story dozens of times, and unlike foolishness are many opinions based. Any belief that is as widespread as this one, that heavy work makes a man muscle-hound, is worthy of investigation, so I have spent much time in digging into the subject. I find that in 9 cases out of 10, the belief is that the muscle-bound condition is confined to the deltoid muscle on the point of the shoulder. Sometimes the commenter will say shoulder-bound, the belief being that the deltoid, which raises the arm from the side, is so tremendously developed and so thick that its possessor is unable to throw a ball for any distance, to deliver a quick forceful blow, or to even fasten his collar at the back of the neck. Now, in all seriousness, can such a condition arise? Have you, for instance, ever seen a man hampered in such a way? I have seen different muscles stiffen and cramp after very hard work, but usually they are not the shoulder muscles. For instance, I have watched a coal heaver shovel vigorously for 15 minutes, all the while in a bent-over position, and then when he did stop to rest and straighten up, it was plain that his back was stiff, but when he resumed his task and warmed up to his work, his back seemed limber enough. Professional ice skaters usually develop large muscles on the shin. An instructor in an ice rink told me that his first few minutes on the ice every morning were pure agony until the shin muscles limbered up. Now, are these 2 cases instances of muscle-bound, or aren't they? Some athletes profess to believe that large, powerful muscles are necessarily slow in action. If that is so, how are we to account for the fact that most jumpers and sprinters have far larger and stronger muscles than the marathon long-distance boys have? I can cite dozens of instances of extreme speed and agility in strongman Sandow throwing back somersaults with feet bound together, and a 56-pound dumbbell in each hand, Saxon tossing a 300-pound barbell from hand to hand above his head, a feat requiring unparalleled speed and precision. Conchas, the military Hercules, catching the back of his neck in dazzling succession, a perfect rain of cannonballs. I could mention dozens more. Once I saw a very clever lifter juggle with a 40-pound cannonball, an ordinary flat iron, and a tiny ball of paper. Few who tried it could even throw the cannonball aloft, much less keep it circling through the air in time with the other objects. Now to come back again to the subject. Is there the slightest basis for the assertion that heavy work makes one muscle-bound? Or is it an argument used as a last resort by trainers and instructors who are desperately afraid that their pupils will excel them in strength and development? Undoubtedly, many athletes sincerely believe that it is possible to become muscle-bound, but they would have a hard time to prove it. Many big men, be they football players, dock laborers, or policemen, are slow and clumsy in motion, but that does not signify that they are muscle-bound. I am perfectly willing to admit that the strongest men are not always the fastest. The man who specializes for speed will develop speed and usually fair strength also. But it doesn't follow that that man who trains for strength loses his speed. Jim Jeffries, in his youth, was a boilermaker, an occupation that is not usually supposed to create lightness and grace. In his prime, Jeffries did not have nearly the speed of Fitzsimmons or Corbett. Yet by combining the fair speed he had with his great strength, he managed to defeat them both. When, after years of retirement, he met Johnson, he found to his immense surprise that he was up against a man far stronger than he. In that fight, Johnson pinned Jeffries' arms to his side and marched him around the ring at will. Stanley Kakachel developed his wonderful strength and hitting power by throwing huge shovelfuls of copper slag into freight cars, about as hard work as you can imagine. And yet Ketchel was a perfect whirlwind, and accounted for dozens of middleweights who had cultivated speed by doing fancy dancing steps around a punching bag. 80% of the great pugilistic stars have been men of great bodily strength. Mere speed alone will make a boxer, but it will not make a fighter. All the wonderful skill and speed of a small man like Attell would not have enabled him to have stood more than a few minutes before a middleweight Hercules like Walcott, who did not have a tithe of Attell's speed. The above seems to prove that a man can be very powerfully developed, and yet not be slow or muscle-hound in the least. In order to state every side of the question, I would say that on my part, I can see how a belief could arise that the use of heavy dumbbells would be apt to stiffen a man's shoulder muscles. 30 or 40 years ago, you could not buy an adjustable dumbbell in this country. The only heavy dumbbells were solid affairs with short handles. You could get a 50-pound dumbbell or a 75-pound dumbbell, or a 100-pound dumbbell, or a 150-pound dumbbell. That about covers the range of bells that were made. The long-handled barbell was unknown. The adjustable dumbbell had not been thought of. A lot of big men, naturally strong and heavy, took up dumbbell lifting, and had to practice with such dumbbells as they could obtain. With these solid, short-handled affairs, there was just about one thing you could do, and that was to slowly and laboriously push them aloft with one hand. If a man spends all of his time exercising in that way, he will in time develop the deltoid muscles of his shoulders out of proportion to the rest of his body, and if the muscles surrounding the shoulder are not proportionately strong, then the shoulder may become slow and unwieldy in action. If, however, the rest of the muscles are developed in proportion to the shoulder muscles, they will all work freely and with equal facility. The other day, a middle-aged man called on me and consulted me about developing himself, and was amazed when I told him that it was possible for a man to acquire an almost perfect development without once lifting a barbell or dumbbell above the height of his shoulders. In most exercises for the legs, the back, and the sides or the waist, the barbells and dumbbells are lifted only a few feet from the ground. The popular belief is, I know, that a man who uses heavy barbells and dumbbells is always and forever pushing them aloft. This is only true when he is practicing real lifting, but it is not true when he is practicing exercises to develop his body and legs. If you would pick out 18 exercises with an adjustable heavyweight apparatus, and those 18 exercises are selected with the idea of developing every part of the body, the bell would be raised over the head in 4 exercises. That is a rather small proportion. The lifters of half a century ago may have been muscle-bound, but the lifters of today are not. If you take a powerful football player or gymnast and have him try one of the quick lifts such as the snatch or the jerk, in 9 cases out of 10 he will fail because he is too slow to execute the movements properly. I presume that it will be admitted that a man who is very supple and limber cannot be muscle-bound. The ordinary man is rather proud if he can lean over and touch his toes with the tips of his fingers without bending his legs at the knees. To do this, it requires a fair amount of elasticity in the muscles on the underside or the thighs, and on the small of the back. These are very important muscles to a lifter, and the use of heavy barbells develops them to a great extent. I know quite a number of lifters who can stand on a block 10 inches high and then lean over and touch the floor without bending the knees. That is, they can bend 10 inches further than the ordinary man can, and they are enabled to do it by the great elasticity of the muscles just mentioned. A lifter who specializes on the one-arm bent press becomes very, very flexible in the waist region and is able to make bends that would be impossible to the ordinary gymnast or physical culturist. By the constant flexing of the muscles of the arms and shoulders, the heavyweight enthusiast obtains not only wonderful mind control over the muscles, but also wonderful flexibility. Sandow and other lifters are able to bend their wrists through a much larger arc of a circle than is possible in the case of the ordinary individual, and they are apparently just as flexible in the shoulder joints as in the wrists.